The sound of hooves thundering across the desert floor echoed in the darkness as Clara Owens stumbled toward the distant glow of lamplight. Her ivory dress transformed into a canvas of crimson horror. Each step sent pain radiating through her body, though none of the blood coating her trembling hands belonged to her, and that truth alone made her heart hammer harder than the physical exhaustion threatening to drag her down into the unforgiving New Mexico sand. The year was 1878, and Hillsboro sat like a jewel of civilization amid the brutal landscape, its handful of buildings promising sanctuary if she could just reach them before her legs gave out completely. She had been running for hours, ever since witnessing the massacre at the Murphy Ranch, where she had been working as a governess for the past 6 months. The bandits had come at sunset, their faces hidden behind dirty bandanas, their guns blazing before anyone could react. She had hidden in the root cellar while the family she cared for was slaughtered above her head, their screams still echoing in her mind like ghosts that would never leave. When silence finally fell and she dared to emerge, she found herself wading through the carnage, checking desperately for survivors among people who had become like family to her. Mrs. Murphy's youngest daughter, sweet little Margaret, had still been breathing when Clara found her, and she had held that child until the light left her eyes, pressing her hands against wounds that would not stop bleeding, begging God for mercy that never came. The edge of Hillsboro materialized before her like a mirage, but Clara's vision was swimming now, black spots dancing at the periphery as shock and exhaustion finally caught up with her body. She managed 3 more steps before her knees buckled, sending her crashing forward onto the hard-packed earth of what appeared to be the main street. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs, and she lay there gasping, unable to find the strength to rise again. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Boots scraped against wood. She heard a voice, low and concerned, but the words seemed to come from very far away. "Madam? Madam, can you hear me?" Strong hands gripped her shoulders, turning her over with surprising gentleness. Clara forced her eyes to focus on the face hovering above her, illuminated by the spill of light from a nearby building. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes the color of weathered leather. A cowboy, she thought dimly, noting the dusty chaps and the worn bandana around his neck. His face was sun-bronzed and handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw darkened by several days of stubble. "The blood," she managed to whisper, watching as his gaze traveled down her ruined dress. "It is not mine." Something shifted in his expression, but he asked no questions. Instead, he slipped one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as though she weighed nothing at all. "I have got you," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Clara wanted to tell him that nowhere was safe, that death could come riding out of the desert at any moment with guns blazing. But unconsciousness was pulling at her like a riptide. She let her head fall against his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heartbeat against her cheek, and surrendered to the darkness. When awareness returned, Clara found herself lying on a soft bed in a room she did not recognize. Sunlight streamed through a window to her left, illuminating whitewashed walls and simple furnishings. She was wearing a clean nightgown, she realized with a start, and her skin no longer bore the sticky residue of blood. Someone had bathed her while she slept. "You are awake." The voice came from the doorway, and Clara turned her head to find a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a sensible bun. "I am Martha Young. My son Franklin brought you here last night. You gave us quite a fright, dear." Franklin, so that was the cowboy's name. Clara tried to sit up, but her body protested with a chorus of aches. "Where am I?" "The Young Ranch, just outside Hillsboro. Franklin has a small homestead here. He raises horses mostly, does some cattle work for the bigger spreads when money is tight." Martha moved into the room carrying a tray laden with food. "You have been asleep for nearly 14 hours. Your body needed the rest." "The blood," Clara said, memories flooding back with brutal clarity. "Did he tell you?" Martha's expression softened with sympathy. He said your dress was soaked with blood that was not your own. We heard about the Murphy Ranch this morning. The sheriff rode out at dawn. I am so terribly sorry, dear. Were you close with the family? Tears burned Clara's eyes. I was their governess. The children were learning their letters. Margaret could almost read on her own. She was only 7 years old. Oh, sweetheart. Martha set the tray aside and gathered Clara into her arms, letting her weep against her shoulder. They stayed that way for a long time, until Clara's tears finally ran dry and exhaustion pulled at her once more. Martha eased her back against the pillows and pressed a cool cloth to her swollen eyes. You rest now. You are safe here, I promise you that. Franklin will not let anything happen to you. Over the following days, Clara slowly emerged from the fog of grief and shock. Martha tended to her with maternal care, bringing meals and fresh clothes that had belonged to her daughter before she married and moved to Santa Fe. Franklin himself remained largely absent during daylight hours, riding out each morning to work his horses and returning only as evening painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. But Clara caught glimpses of him through the window, watching as he moved among the animals with easy confidence, his voice low and soothing as he worked with a particularly skittish mare. On the fourth evening, she finally ventured out of the house, drawn by the sound of his voice drifting across the yard. She found him in the corral, one hand extended toward the mare who had been watching her all week. The horse nickered nervously, tossing her head, but Franklin did not move. He simply stood there, patient and still, until curiosity won out over fear, and the mare took a tentative step forward. That is it, he murmured. Nobody is going to hurt you. You are safe here. The words sent an unexpected shiver through Clara. She must have made some sound, because Franklin glanced over his shoulder, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her. Miss Owens, you should not be out of bed yet. I needed air, she said, moving closer to the fence. I have been watching you with her. She seems terrified of everything. Franklin turned his attention back to the mare, who had retreated several steps at Clara's approach. She came from a ranch where the owner believed in breaking horses through force. By the time I bought her, she was too scared to let anyone near her without trying to bolt or kick. He paused, then added softly, Some things leave scars that go deeper than the skin. Clara understood what he was really saying. She gripped the fence rail, feeling the rough wood bite into her palms. Your mother told me you asked no questions that night. Why? He was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Because some things do not need explaining. You were hurt and scared, and you needed help. That was all that mattered. He moved slowly toward the mare again, his movements deliberate and calm. Questions could wait until you were ready to answer them. The Murphy family was murdered by outlaws, Clara said, the words coming easier now that she had spoken them to Martha. I was hiding in the cellar. I heard everything, but I could not stop it. When I came out, Mrs. Murphy was already gone, and the children were dying. I tried to save Margaret, the youngest. I held her and pressed my hands against the wounds, but there was so much blood and she was so small. Her voice cracked. I couldn't save her. Franklin left the mare and crossed to the fence, his eyes full of understanding rather than pity. It was not your fault. I know that in my head, Clara whispered, but my heart does not believe it yet. Give it time. He reached out as though to touch her hand, then seemed to think better of it and let his own fall back to his side. You are alive, Miss Owens. That matters. You survived, and now you have the chance to keep living. Do not waste that gift by drowning in guilt over things you could not control. She looked at him properly then, really seeing him for the first time. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably only a year or two older than her own 22 years. His face was open and honest, with none of the hardness she had come to expect from men in this rough country. There was kindness in his eyes, but also a deep well of strength that suggested he knew something about surviving hardship himself. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me that night, for not turning me away." "You do not need to thank me for basic human decency," Franklin replied, but there was warmth in his voice. "You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. Ma enjoys having another woman around, and heaven knows this place could use some civilizing influence." Despite everything, Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I am not sure how civilizing I can be when I just spent 4 days sleeping and crying. You're grieving. That is allowed." He glanced toward the house, where lamplight was beginning to glow in the windows as dusk settled over the land. "Come on. Ma will have supper ready soon, and she gets ornery when people let her food get cold." They walked back together, and Clara found herself grateful for his solid presence beside her. The world still felt tilted and wrong. Her heart still ached with loss, but for the first time since that terrible night, she felt like perhaps she might survive the weight of her sorrow after all. Supper was a simple affair of stew and fresh bread, but Martha had worked magic with limited ingredients. Clara discovered she was ravenous, and she ate with an appetite that surprised her. Franklin sat across the table, mostly quiet as his mother chattered about the neighbors and local gossip, but Clara caught him watching her several times with an expression she could not quite decipher. After the meal, Martha shooed them both outside while she cleaned up, insisting that Clara needed fresh air and that Franklin needed to stop hovering like a mother hen. They found themselves on the porch, sitting in comfortable silence as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. "How long have you been in New Mexico?" Franklin asked eventually. "About 2 years. I came from Missouri after my parents died. They had cholera." Clara wrapped her arms around herself, though the evening was still warm. "I had some education, enough to work as a governess, and the Murphys needed someone to teach their children. It seemed like a good opportunity to start fresh somewhere new. I am sorry about your parents. I am sorry you have had to deal with a traumatized stranger invading your home." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You are not invading anything, and you have nothing to apologize for." He hesitated, then added, "My father died 5 years ago, thrown from a horse that spooked at a rattlesnake. He broke his neck, died instantly. Ma and I have been running this place together ever since, so I know something about loss, about having your world turned upside down in a single moment." "I am sorry," Clara said softly. "That must have been terrible." "It was, but we survived it, just like you are going to survive this." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze returning to the stars. "The first few months were the hardest. Everything reminded me of him, but eventually the sharp edges of grief wore down into something more manageable. It never goes away completely, but it gets easier to carry." They sat together until the moon rose, talking about everything and nothing. Franklin told her about the ranch, about his dreams of building up the horse breeding operation until it was profitable enough to hire help. Clara shared stories about her childhood in Missouri, about lazy summers by the creek and winter nights huddled around the fire. It was the most normal she had felt in days, and when they finally said goodnight and retreated to their separate rooms, Clara found herself thinking about Franklin Young and the gentle kindness in his eyes. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Clara helped Martha with household chores, grateful for the distraction and the chance to feel useful again. She learned to make bread from scratch, to preserve vegetables from the garden, to mend clothes with neat, invisible stitches. Martha was a patient teacher, and she seemed genuinely pleased to have Clara's company. Franklin continued his work with the horses, but Clara noticed he made more of an effort to be around during meal times and in the evenings. Sometimes she would join him at the corral, watching as he worked with the skittish mare or trained younger horses for sale. He had a gift with animals, she realized, an almost preternatural ability to read their moods and respond accordingly. The frightened mare who had been so wild upon arrival was slowly transforming under his care, growing calmer and more trusting with each passing day. "You have a real talent for this," Clara observed one afternoon. watching as the mare finally allowed Franklin to slip a halter over her head without panicking. My father taught me that fear is just protection, Franklin replied, stroking the mare's neck. These animals have been hurt before, so they expect hurt again. You have to show them patience, prove through actions rather than words that you mean them no harm. Eventually, if you are consistent and kind, they start to believe it. Clara wondered if he was still talking about horses. She found herself thinking about Franklin more and more as summer deepened into early autumn. She noticed small things. The way his face lit up when he smiled, how his hands were always gentle despite their obvious strength, the patient kindness he showed not just to animals, but to everyone around him. He made her feel safe in a way she had not felt since before her parents died, and she caught herself watching for him, listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, feeling oddly disappointed on the rare evenings when ranch work kept him away past dark. One evening in September, Clara was helping Martha shell peas on the porch when the older woman gave her a knowing look. "My Franklin is a good man," she said casually, though there was definite intention behind the words. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Yes, he is. He has not shown much interest in courting before now. Always said he was too busy with the ranch, that he did not have time for such things." Martha's fingers worked efficiently, splitting pods and dropping peas into the bowl with practiced ease. "But I see the way he looks at you, dear, and I see the way you look back." "I do not know what you mean," Clara protested weakly, but they both knew she was lying. Martha laughed, the sound warm and affectionate. "Of course you do, and there is nothing wrong with it. You have both been through loss, and you understand each other because of it. That is a good foundation." She paused, then added more seriously, "I know you are still healing from what happened at the Murphy Ranch. Nobody expects you to be over that. But do not let grief blind you to the possibility of happiness, Clara. Life is too short and too hard out here to turn away from joy when it is offered." Clara thought about those words that night as she lay in bed, listening to the distant howl of coyotes. Was she ready for something like this? Her heart still ached when she thought about the Murphy family, about little Margaret's last breath shuddering against her chest. But Martha was right that life was short and uncertain. She had learned that lesson in blood and horror. If there was a chance for happiness with Franklin, did she dare reach for it? The answer came to her gradually over the following weeks. She and Franklin began spending more time together, their conversations growing deeper and more personal. He told her about his fears for the ranch, about the constant struggle to make ends meet in a landscape that could turn hostile with a single drought or harsh winter. She shared her dreams of having a real home again, of building something lasting in a world that felt so temporary and fragile. One evening in late October, Franklin invited her to ride out with him to check on the herd in the far pasture. Clara had learned basic riding from Martha, enough to feel reasonably confident on the gentle mare they had assigned to her use. They rode out as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of amber and rose, the air finally cool after the brutal heat of summer. "I have been thinking," Franklin said, as they crested a rise overlooking his small herd of cattle. "About the future, I mean. About what I want from life." Clara's heart began to beat faster, though she kept her voice casual. "Oh, and what did you conclude?" He reined in his horse and turned to look at her, his expression earnest. "I realized that I was lying to myself. I kept saying the ranch was enough, that I did not need anything else. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of losing someone the way I lost my father. Scared of the responsibility of caring for another person." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Then you came stumbling into town covered in blood, and everything changed." "Franklin," Clara breathed, but he held up a hand. "Hold up. Let me finish. These past few months with you here have been the happiest I can remember since Pa died. You make the house feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. You make me laugh, you challenge my thinking, and you understand what it is like to survive something that should have broken you. He dismounted and came to stand beside her horse, looking up at her with vulnerable honesty. I know you are still healing. I know you might not be ready for this, but I need you to know that I care about you, Clara, more than I probably should given how short a time we have known each other. And if you think you might feel the same way, then I would very much like to court you properly. Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but these were not born of grief. She slid down from her horse, and Franklin caught her automatically, his hands steadying her. They stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling evening air. I do feel the same way, she admitted softly. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too soon, that I was being foolish. But I cannot help it, Franklin. When I am with you, the world feels less frightening. You make me believe that good things can still happen, that life is about more than just surviving. His face broke into a smile that transformed him from handsome to breathtaking. Yeah? Yeah, she confirmed, and then he was kissing her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Clara let herself sink into the moment, let herself believe in the possibility of happiness after horror, of love blooming in the aftermath of loss. They courted through the winter, their relationship deepening as the weather turned cold, and the desert landscape transformed into something stark and beautiful. Franklin was a thoughtful suitor, bringing her small gifts when he went into town, taking her on rides through the countryside, sitting with her on the porch during the long evenings, and talking until the stars wheeled overhead. Martha watched them with obvious approval, making herself scarce whenever possible to give them time alone together. Clara discovered new facets of Franklin's character as they grew closer. She learned that he had a wicked sense of humor that emerged when he was comfortable, that he could play the harmonica with surprising skill, that he read poetry in secret and sometimes quoted verses he particularly loved. He was ambitious, but not ruthlessly so, hardworking, but not to the point of forgetting to enjoy life. He treated her as an equal, valuing her opinions and listening when she spoke, never dismissing her thoughts simply because she was a woman. In turn, she shared parts of herself she had kept hidden since losing her parents. She told him about her love of sketching, how she had once dreamed of becoming a real artist before practicality forced her into governessing. He bought her a set of pencils and paper from town, and she began drawing again, capturing the ranch and the horses, and Franklin himself in careful detail. She also confessed her fears about the future, about her terror of losing someone she loved again, of having happiness snatched away just when she started to believe in it. I cannot promise nothing bad will ever happen, Franklin said when she voiced these worries one evening. Life is uncertain, especially out here, but I can promise that whatever comes, we will face it together. You will not be alone in it, Clara. Not ever again. It was exactly what she needed to hear. The nightmares about the Murphy Ranch were becoming less frequent, the guilt less crushing. She would never forget that night, would always carry the scar of it on her heart, but Franklin was right that the sharp edges were slowly wearing down into something more bearable. She was learning to live with her grief rather than being consumed by it, and Franklin's steady presence was a large part of that healing. In March of 1879, nearly a year after Clara had stumbled into Hillsborough covered in blood, Franklin asked her to marry him. They were at the corral watching the once frightened mare, who was now calm and trusting, nuzzling Franklin's pockets for the treats she knew he carried. The symbolism was not lost on Clara. You healed her, she said, stroking the mare's soft nose. She is a completely different horse now. She healed herself, Franklin corrected. I just gave her the time and space to do it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring. Just like you have healed yourself over this past year, I have watched you transform, Clara, watched you come back to life, and I would be honored if you would consent to be my wife. Clara looked at the ring, then at Franklin's hopeful face, then at the ranch spread out around them, this place that had become home. Yes, she said, joy bubbling up in her chest. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married in April in the small church in Hillsborough, with Martha crying happy tears and half the town in attendance. Clara wore a simple blue dress, as different from the blood-soaked gown of that terrible night as she could manage, and Franklin looked impossibly handsome in a new suit he had bought specially for the occasion. The ceremony was brief, but the words felt weighted with significance, promises made in the presence of God and community. The wedding supper was held at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and music and laughter that lasted long into the night. Clara danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling lighter than she had in years. This was her life now, she realized. Not the governess who had lost everything, not the frightened woman stumbling through the desert, but Clara Young, wife and partner, building a future with a good man in a hard land. Martha moved to a small house in town shortly after the wedding, claiming she wanted to be closer to the church and her friends, though Clara suspected she simply wanted to give the newlyweds privacy. They visited her often, bringing supplies and news from the ranch, and she remained a constant presence in their lives. Life as Franklin's wife suited Clara better than she could have imagined. They worked side by side during the day, building up the horse breeding operation until it became known throughout the territory for producing quality animals. Franklin handled the training while Clara managed the business side, keeping careful records and negotiating sales with a sharp mind for numbers. They made a good team, their skills complementing each other perfectly. The physical side of their marriage was a revelation for Clara, who had approached her wedding night with some trepidation based on whispered warnings from other women. But Franklin was as patient and gentle in the bedroom as he was with his horses, taking time to learn what brought her pleasure, never pushing her beyond what she was comfortable with. Their intimacy deepened alongside their emotional connection until Clara could not imagine her life without him. In the spring of 1880, Clara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She wanted a child desperately, wanted to create a family with Franklin, but the memory of holding dying Margaret Murphy haunted her still. What if something went wrong? What if she lost this baby the way she had lost so much else? Franklin held her while she cried out her fears, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances. "Our child is going to be fine," he said firmly. "You are going to be fine. We will get Martha back here to help, and we will bring the doctor from town if we need to. You are not alone in this, Clara, remember?" His confidence bolstered her own, and as her belly grew round with life, Clara found her fears gradually replaced by excitement. She sewed tiny clothes and prepared a nursery in the spare bedroom, painting the walls a cheerful yellow. Franklin built a cradle from scratch, working on it during the winter evenings until it was perfect, smooth, and sturdy and beautiful. Their son was born in December during a cold snap that frosted the windows and made the house feel like a cozy refuge from the world. The labor was long and difficult, but Martha coached Clara through it with experienced hands, and Franklin refused to leave her side despite the older woman's insistence that childbirth was women's work. When their baby finally emerged, red-faced and squalling with indignation, Clara wept with relief and overwhelming love. "He is perfect," Franklin breathed, cradling the infant with careful reverence. "Absolutely perfect." They named him James Franklin Young, and he became the center of their universe. Clara had never known she could love something so much. This tiny person who depended on them for everything. Watching Franklin with their son only deepened her feelings for her husband. He was a natural father, patient and playful and completely devoted. The years that followed were full and busy. The horse breeding operation continued to grow until they had to hire help to manage everything. Clara juggled motherhood with the business, discovering she had a talent for both. James grew into a bright, curious toddler with his father's brown eyes and his mother's quick mind. In 1882, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Martha Young after Franklin's mother. The little girl had Clara's auburn hair and Franklin's sunny disposition, and James took his role as big brother very seriously. The house rang with children's laughter, with the sounds of a family truly thriving. One evening when Rose was about 6 months old, Clara found Franklin on the porch watching the sunset. as had become their habit when the day's work was done. She settled beside him, fitting against his side as naturally as breathing. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked quietly. "When I came stumbling into town?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "I remember thinking you were the most frightened thing I had ever seen, all covered in blood and barely able to stand. And I remember thinking that I had to help you, that there was no question about it." "You changed my life that night," Clara said. "You gave me back everything I thought I had lost. A home, a family, a future worth living for." Franklin turned to kiss her forehead. "You did the same for me. I was just existing before you arrived, going through the motions but not really living. You reminded me what it felt like to hope, to dream about something more than just surviving." He paused, then added with characteristic honesty, "I love you, Clara Young, more than I can properly express." "I love you too," she replied, her heart full to overflowing. "Thank you for asking no questions that night. Thank you for just helping me when I needed it most." "Always," he promised. "For as long as we both shall live." As the years continued to pass, that promise held true. They faced droughts and harsh winters, economic hardships, and the occasional difficult foal. They celebrated when James started school, when Rose took her first steps, when the ranch turned its first significant profit. They mourned when Martha passed peacefully in her sleep in 1885, grateful that she had lived to see her grandchildren and to know her son was happy. Through it all, their love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. They still took evening rides when they could, still sat on the porch after the children were asleep, and talked until the stars came out. The passion between them never faded, deepening instead into something richer and more complex as they grew together. In 1888, Clara discovered she was pregnant again, much to their surprise. Rose was 6 and James 8, and they had assumed their family was complete. But when their second son, Daniel, was born healthy and strong that winter, they welcomed him with the same love and devotion they had shown their other children. James grew into a young man who shared his father's way with horses, while Rose developed her mother's head for business and numbers. Daniel was still too young to show his particular talents, but he was a sweet-natured child who seemed to collect stray animals the way some children collected rocks. On a warm evening in 1895, Clara and Franklin sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. James, now 15, was teaching Rose to rope a fence post. Daniel, 6 years old, was building something elaborate in the dirt with sticks and stones. The ranch had grown prosperous over the years. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family, the land dotted with strong corrals and sturdy outbuildings. "Do you remember what you told me once?" Clara asked, her hand finding Franklin's. "About the mare, about how fear is just protection?" "I remember," Franklin replied, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I was like her when I came here, so scared, so hurt, expecting danger around every corner." Clara watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, the same colors that had greeted her that terrible night 17 years ago. "But you were patient with me, just like you were with her. You showed me through actions that I was safe, that I could trust again. You gave me the time and space to heal." Franklin pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You did the hard work yourself. I just provided a safe place to do it." "We saved each other," Clara corrected softly. "You were just going through the motions before I arrived, and I was shattered into pieces. But together we built something beautiful out of all that brokenness." As if to emphasize her point, Rose shrieked with laughter as her rope finally caught the post, while James whooped his approval. Daniel looked up from his construction project long enough to cheer for his sister, then went immediately back to his building. "Yeah," Franklin agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "We really did." That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Clara stood at the window of the bedroom she shared with Franklin, looking out at the moonlit landscape. She thought about the governess who had stumbled out of the desert with blood on her hands and death in her heart. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime entirely. The scars remained, of course. She still occasionally woke from nightmares about that night at the Murphy Ranch, still felt her breath catch when she heard unexpected gunshots. But those moments were growing rarer as time passed, and Franklin was always there to hold her through them, to remind her that she was safe, that the past was behind her. She heard him come up behind her, felt his arms encircle her waist as he rested his chin on her shoulder. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who had found each other in the midst of tragedy and built a life together through love and determination. "What are you thinking about?" Franklin murmured. "How far we have come," Clara replied. "How lucky I am that you were the one who found me that night." "I am the lucky one," he countered. "I got to spend the last 17 years loving you, building a life with you. That is more than most men can hope for." Clara turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him properly. Even after all these years, the touch of his lips still sent warmth flooding through her, still made her heart race. Some things never changed, and she was grateful for it. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity, knowing exactly how to please each other after so many years together. Afterward, Clara lay with her head on Franklin's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt completely at peace. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the young family grew and changed with them. James eventually married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread, a practical young woman named Elizabeth, who shared his love of horses. They built a house on the far edge of the property and started their own family, giving Clara and Franklin their first grandchildren. Rose shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher, but both her parents supported her decision wholeheartedly. She attended normal school in Santa Fe and returned to Hillsboro to teach at the local schoolhouse, becoming beloved by her students for her patience and innovative teaching methods. Daniel, true to his childhood nature, became a veterinarian, traveling to study in the East before returning home to practice. He set up an office in Hillsboro and quickly became indispensable to all the ranchers in the area, his gentle way with animals inherited directly from his father. Through it all, Clara and Franklin remained the steady center around which their family orbited. They were the ones everyone came to for advice, for comfort, for celebration. Their love story became something of a legend in Hillsboro, the tale of the blood-soaked woman and the cowboy who asked no questions, who simply helped when help was needed most. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1904, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The house was packed with family and friends, with neighbors who had become like family over the years. There was music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. James gave a toast that made Clara cry, talking about how his parents had shown him what real love looked like, how their partnership had set the standard he strived for in his own marriage. Later, when the party had wound down and the guests had departed, Clara and Franklin walked out to the corral where it had all truly begun. The old mare who had been so frightened all those years ago had died peacefully of old age the previous winter, but her descendants dotted the ranch, all of them bearing her gentle temperament and quality bloodlines. 25 years, Clara marveled, leaning against the fence. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. I know what you mean, Franklin replied, his arms settling comfortably around her shoulders. At 51, he was still strong and capable, though his hair was now more silver than dark. I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I do not want to imagine it. Then do not, Clara said simply. She was 47 now, with laugh lines around her eyes and silver threading through her auburn hair. But she felt beautiful when Franklin looked at her, felt cherished and loved and completely at home in her own skin. We still have years ahead of us, God willing. More grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch together, more of this life we built. More of everything, Franklin agreed, pulling her close. That sounds perfect to me. And it was perfect, or as close to perfect as life in this hard, beautiful land could be. They had faced loss and trauma, had been broken by grief and put back together by love. Their story had started in blood and terror, but it had transformed into something lovely and lasting, a testament to the power of kindness and patience and choosing to help when help was needed. The years continued to unfold gently. Clara and Franklin grew older together, their bond deepening with each passing season. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family that included not just their three children, but eventually 8 grandchildren, and as time marched on, even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch prospered under their stewardship, and later under James's management as Franklin gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations. But even in his 70s, Franklin could often be found at the corrals, offering advice to his son or working with a particularly challenging horse. Some passions, Clara reflected, never truly faded. She herself remained active in the community, helping Rose at the school when extra hands were needed, keeping the ranch's books meticulously organized, and serving as a sort of unofficial counselor to young women in town who needed advice or simply a sympathetic ear. She never forgot what it was like to be lost and frightened, and she made it her mission to ensure no one in her orbit felt that way if she could help it. In 1910, when they celebrated their 31st anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a special celebration. Rose, now 44 and still teaching, stood up to make a speech that had clearly been carefully prepared. Most children grow up with some understanding that their parents love each other, she began, her voice carrying across the assembled family. But my brothers and I grew up with something more than that. We grew up watching a love story unfold in real time, seeing every day how two people who had both suffered terrible losses chose to build something beautiful together. She turned to look at her parents, her eyes shining with tears. Mother, you have told me the story of how you met Father, though not all the details. I know it was a dark time for you, that you had survived something terrible. But I also know that Father helped you without hesitation, without judgment, without demanding explanations. She shifted her gaze to Franklin. And Father, you found in Mother a partner who made your life complete, who brought light back into a world that had gone dim after Grandfather died. Rose paused, wiping at her eyes. You taught us that love is not just romance, though you certainly have that. Love is also partnership and patience. It is choosing each other every single day, even when things are hard. It is building a life together, brick by brick, year by year, never taking for granted the gift of the person beside you. Clara found herself crying openly now, and Franklin's hand gripped hers tightly. Around them, their family listened with rapt attention as Rose continued. So today, on your 31st anniversary, I want to thank you. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like. Thank you for creating a home filled with warmth and laughter. Thank you for being the foundation upon which all of us have built our own lives. She raised her glass. To Clara and Franklin Young, the greatest love story Hillsborough has ever seen. The toast was echoed by everyone present, and Clara felt overwhelmed by gratitude for this life she had been given. When she thought back to that terrible night in 1878, stumbling through the darkness convinced she would die in the desert, she could never have imagined ending up here, surrounded by family and love and joy. That evening, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet once more, Clara and Franklin sat on the porch in the rocking chairs that had become their customary spots. The desert night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Rose made me cry, Clara said, her voice still thick with emotion. She made everyone cry, Franklin replied with a chuckle. That girl always did have a way with words. She was right, though, about everything. Clara reached for his hand, their fingers interlacing with practiced ease. I could not have survived without you, Franklin. You saved my life that night in more ways than one. And you saved mine, he countered, bringing her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. I was half alive before you arrived, Clara. You reminded me what it meant to truly live, to hope, to love. I am the one who should be grateful. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the desert, to the distant lowing of cattle and the chirp of crickets. Clara felt profoundly content, at peace with her past, and hopeful for whatever future remained to them. "Do you think Margaret would be proud of me?" she asked suddenly, the question emerging from some deep place she usually kept locked away. "I think about her sometimes, about all of them. Wonder what they would think of the life I built after they died." Franklin was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I think they would be incredibly proud. You survived something that would have destroyed most people. You took that trauma and you let it make you stronger, kinder, more compassionate. You built a family and a business and a legacy that will outlast both of us." He squeezed her hand. "And most importantly, you lived, Clara. You really, truly lived. That is the best tribute you could give to people whose lives were cut short." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, but these were cleansing tears, washing away the last remnants of guilt she had carried for so long. "Thank you," she whispered, "for always knowing exactly what I need to hear." "That is what 31 years of marriage gets you," Franklin replied with a gentle smile. "I know you better than I know myself sometimes." As the years continued to advance, Clara and Franklin settled into the comfortable rhythms of old age. They moved a bit slower, their bodies bearing the accumulated aches and pains of 7 decades of hard living, but their minds remained sharp and their love for each other never wavered. In 1915, tragedy struck when James was thrown from a horse and broke his leg badly. The injury became infected despite Daniel's best efforts, and for a terrifying few weeks, it seemed they might lose him. Clara found herself transported back to that night at the Murphy Ranch, watching helplessly as someone she loved suffered. But this time, the outcome was different. James survived, though he walked with a limp afterward. The experience reminded Clara and Franklin both that life was precious and uncertain, that every day together was a gift not to be taken for granted. They became even more deliberate about spending time with their children and grandchildren, about creating memories and passing down stories of their shared history. On a warm spring evening in 1918, as the world outside New Mexico was consumed by a terrible war, Clara and Franklin celebrated their 39th wedding anniversary quietly at home. They were 71 and 73 respectively now, their bodies frail but their spirits still strong. 39 years, Clara marveled, settling carefully into her rocking chair. "In 2 more years, we will have been married for 4 decades. "Best 4 decades of my life," Franklin replied, though his voice was thinner now. His breathing sometimes labored. "Every single year with you has been a blessing, Clara." She reached for his hand, noting how the skin was thin as paper now, spotted with age. But to her, he was still the handsome young cowboy who had scooped her up from the dirt and carried her to safety, who had asked no questions and simply helped when she needed it most. "I love you," she said softly. "More than words can express. You gave me everything, Franklin. A home, a family, a reason to keep living when I wanted to give up. You gave me yourself every day for 39 years, and that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." "I love you too," he replied, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You are my heart, Clara Young. Always have been, always will be." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Clara felt at peace. Whatever time they had left, whether it was years or months or days, she knew they would face it together, just as they had faced everything else. Franklin passed away peacefully in his sleep in October of 1920, 2 weeks after their 41st wedding anniversary. Clara woke to find him gone, his face peaceful and relaxed, and though her heart shattered with the loss, she was grateful he had not suffered, that he had simply slipped away quietly in the night. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of New Mexico. Franklin had been beloved in the community, known for his honesty and kindness and skill with horses. But it was Clara that people watched with concern, worried that losing her husband after so many years together might break her. They need not have worried. Clara grieved deeply and truly, letting herself feel the full weight of her loss. But she did not break. Franklin had taught her too well how to survive sorrow, how to carry grief without letting it consume her. She leaned on her children and grandchildren, found comfort in her memories, and gradually learned to live in a world without him. She remained at the ranch, refusing all suggestions that she move to town or come live with one of her children. This was her home, filled with memories of Franklin and the life they had built together. She was not ready to leave it, might never be ready. Clara lived for another 8 years, remaining active and engaged with her family and community until the very end. She finally passed away in her sleep in March of 1928, 3 months shy of her 81st birthday. Her children found her in the bed she had shared with Franklin for so many years, a peaceful smile on her face and an old photograph clutched in her hand. The photograph was one taken on their 10th wedding anniversary, showing a young Clara and Franklin standing in front of the ranch house, their arms around each other, their faces lit with joy. On the back, in Clara's careful handwriting, were the words, "He asked no questions, just helped me. And in helping me, he gave me everything." They buried her next to Franklin in the Hillsborough Cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, "Clara Owens Young, 1847–1928, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She lived fully and loved deeply." At the funeral, Rose stood before the assembled mourners and told the story properly for the first time, the story of how her mother had stumbled into Hillsborough covered in blood that was not her own, how her father had scooped her up and brought her home without asking for explanations or demanding answers. She spoke of the love that had grown from that moment of compassion, of the family that had been built on a foundation of kindness and patience. "My mother survived things that should have destroyed her," Rose said, her voice strong despite her tears. She lost her parents, lost a family she had come to love, found herself alone in a harsh land with nothing but trauma and grief. But she also found my father, and he showed her that survival is not enough, that life is meant to be lived fully and loved deeply. She paused, looking out at the crowd of family and friends who had gathered to say goodbye. They built something beautiful together, my parents, a family, a business, a legacy of love and compassion that will outlast all of us. And they did it by choosing each other, every single day for 41 years, by being partners in the truest sense of the word. Rose's voice broke, but she pushed through. "So as we lay my mother to rest beside my father, I want us to remember not just their deaths, but their lives. Remember how they loved each other, how they built something lasting from broken pieces. Remember that kindness matters, that helping someone in need can change the course of their entire life. Remember that love, real love, is the most powerful force in the world." As the service concluded and people filed past the grave to pay their respects, the young family stood together, 3 generations bound by the legacy of Clara and Franklin's love. James was there with his wife and children, Rose with her students and colleagues who had become like family, Daniel with his own growing brood. They were the living proof of what could grow from a single moment of compassion, from a cowboy's decision to help a frightened woman without demanding explanations. Their parents' love story had become the foundation upon which all their lives were built, a testament to the power of choosing kindness even in the darkest moments. And so the story ended as all stories must, with death and grief and farewell. But it was not a sad ending, not really, because Clara and Franklin Young had lived fully and loved deeply, had built something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of tragedy. They had taken the worst moment of Clara's life and transformed it into something miraculous, proving that even in the Wild West, even in the hardest times, love could bloom and flourish and create something eternal. Their great-grandchildren would grow up hearing the story of how their great-grandmother stumbled into Hillsborough with a dress soaked in blood that was not her own, and how their great-grandfather asked no questions, just helped her. They would learn about the horse ranch that grew from that moment, about the family that was built on a foundation of compassion and patience. They would inherit not just property and possessions, but also values, a legacy of kindness that would ripple forward through generations. In the years that followed, the ranch continued to prosper under James's management and eventually under his son's stewardship. The Young name became synonymous with quality horses and ethical business practices. But more than that, it became associated with the love story at its heart. People would point to the ranch house and say, "That is where the woman covered in blood found sanctuary. That is where the cowboy who asked no questions built a life with the woman he saved." The house itself became something of a family shrine, preserved carefully even as the ranch modernized around it. The porch where Clara and Franklin had spent countless evenings still stood, the rocking chairs replaced many times over, but always kept in the same spots. The corral where Franklin had trained his horses and where he had first really talked to Clara remained, though it housed different animals now. And in the living room, prominently displayed, hung a large portrait of Clara and Franklin taken on their 30th anniversary. They were older in this picture, their hair silver and their faces lined with age, but the love shining in their eyes was unmistakable. Beside it hung Clara's wedding photograph and the anniversary photo she had been holding when she died, creating a triptych that told their story without words. Every year on April 15th, the anniversary of Clara and Franklin's wedding, the Young family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. It became tradition to tell the story again, to remind the younger generations of where they came from, of the love and sacrifice and courage that had created the family they were part of. And every year, without fail, someone would raise a toast to the cowboy who asked no questions, and the woman whose dress was soaked with blood that was not her own, who found each other in the darkness and built a life together in the light. Their story became the kind of legend that families pass down through generations, growing richer and more meaningful with each telling. It was a reminder that even in the hardest times, even when everything seems lost, there is hope, that a single act of kindness can change everything. That love, when given freely and nurtured carefully, can transform tragedy into triumph. And so Clara Owens Young and Franklin Young lived on, not just in memory, but in the legacy they created, in the family that bore their name and carried their values forward into an uncertain future. They had taken the Wild West at its harshest and found beauty there, had built something lasting from broken pieces, had proven that love could flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances. Their story, which began with blood and terror and a cowboy's decision to help without asking questions, became a story of hope and healing and happily ever after. It was proof that the best love stories are not the ones without hardship, but the ones where two people face hardship together and emerge stronger for it. It was a testament to the power of patience and kindness and choosing to see the best in someone even when they are at their worst. And though Clara and Franklin themselves were gone, returned to the New Mexico soil they had loved so well, their love remained immortal and unshakable, a beacon for everyone who came after them. They had built something beautiful in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, and that beauty endured generation after generation, a living monument to two people who found each other in the darkness and chose love every single day for the rest of their lives.